So today's lesson is on the solutions to climate change and having a look at some of these. So there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of possible climate change strategies. They appear up all the time. BuzzFeed has amazing articles on them in terms of like, this is 5 things you can do with your mobile phone to tackle climate change, which is true. But we're going to look at some big ones which might actually have much larger impact. So mainly looking at why they're a solution, how does it reduce emissions, and is it a good strategy or not? So a bit of that evaluation in there as well. And just something to say that you might hear this phrase in climate change a lot, that net zero emissions does not mean zero emissions. It means that if we produce 100, that's horrible. If we produce 100 tons of CO2, we remove 100 tons. We remove 100 tons as well. So it equals 0. That is like the worst writing ever. So it equals 0. So that's what zero emissions means. It doesn't mean that we stop producing any carbon dioxide or emissions. It means that we also look at ways that we can draw back down. So our first strategy that we're going to look at is renewable energy. This is the big famous one. So there are 5 different ways that renewable energy works. So we've got like wind energy, where we put up wind turbines so they can convert movement into energy. We have hydropower, so like dams or tidal energy works with that as well. We have solar energy, where we convert sunlight using solar panels. Geothermal energy, where we use the natural heat of the ground to create turn generators which produce energy. And biomass. Biomass is the only one that's slightly different from the other ones, because that is where we literally use like compressed wood or compressed fuel to create heat, which then turns turbines. They all really work the same way. Energy generation is all about turning a big turbine round, and as it turns, it creates like electrical energy in between it, which then comes along and powers our phone. And really what these carbon emission fuel stations do is they just do that in a very reliable scale, that they can start burning coal or gas that creates smoke that goes up and turns a generator round. So all we really want to do is make something that can turn that generator around. So wind energy is the most obvious one, that the wind comes in and turns that generator. The same with hydropower, that water flows down, turning that generator. So making the energy release. Biomass is the same as this one. They burn stuff to create it, although it's then renewable energy, so it's like wood or forests that are burnt. And geothermal is the same. They create heat, which produces steam, which moves up and turns a generator and turns that generator around to create energy. So that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to find ways of turning this generator round and round and round and round, so that, but in a way that doesn't burn any fossil fuels. So that is why these work, these renewable energies work, because they're done in a way that we can keep it going for years and years and years without having to rely on burning fossil fuels. So that's why they work. That's why we use them. We are constantly using more energy now than we ever have before. So if you think of smartphones, if you think of TVs, cars, electric cars, they're a solution as well, but then you need to find a way to charge up your electric cars. You're using computers, TVs. Obviously, everyone's talking just now about how being in lockdown, we're not driving around as much, we're not flying about as much. That's true. but we're staying at home, we're producing more heat, we're doing more electrical use in the house, and if that doesn't come from a renewable source, then it's got to come from this one. So the Scottish target is to generate 100% of renewable energy by 2020. They have actually achieved this. They have, one day last year, they managed to generate all of Scotland's energy needs by renewable energy. Just because they can do it at a very specific time doesn't mean they can do it all the time. The big problem we've got with renewable energy is that we can't do it on demand. We need the wind to blow, we need the sun to be shining, we need the water to flow. So we can't guarantee it when it's a break in between Coronation Street and everyone goes and boils a kettle. So this is why the other target they have is to supply 50% of the total consumption by 2030. So if they can supply half of it by 2030, whenever anyone needs it, that's their target just now. And that is really the big problem with renewable energy, that it is not storable. They need batteries, basically. And that's actually something that Elon Musk is working on. That's something that he's really developing, is how you store that energy. And if you can come up with a solution to how you can store renewable energy, you can currently make yourself a lot of money. The one other limitation with this, which I've kind of highlighted in the sway stuff, is that building hydro dams and building wind turbines actually creates a lot of CO2. So if you're creating a lot of carbon emissions while you're building this stuff, you actually then have to have a long time before it offsets itself. So it becomes at net zero and then actually starts producing a benefit. It will do it, but it just takes a long time. So that's one solution. Very similar to that is, because we've now identified that we can't fully get rid of these guys yet, so these carbon emitting power stations yet, is this one. It's called carbon capture. So carbon capture is literally, as the emissions come out, they're caught and rediverted into these pipes, which are then taken and either pumped down into storage wells under the sea, which might be like old oil wells, where they used to have oil wells. So they can, instead of once they've taken oil out, they can put carbon dioxide back in, so they can transport them along. Ships might transport them out to storage materials at sea, which are then pumped down inside, and you can actually store them in the soil as well. The problem being with this is that is a really good way to stop any new emissions. So, and that's all you're really doing, is you're making sure that these polluters are not producing any new emissions. So it doesn't really like solve the problem, it just stops the problem from becoming worse. The difficulty being is if you don't capture it here, once it goes out into the atmosphere, it becomes harder and harder to catch, because it's almost like it's part of the air at that point, or it is part of the air by that point, and once it's way out, there's nothing you can really do to get that out of the atmosphere. So this is a really good method because it allows us to keep producing electricity from existing power stations without creating any emissions. So that's our solution. But the problem is, if it's not done properly, it's difficult. It's still adding to the problem. So how am I recapping that? Oh, let's get rid of like the colourful pencil. So it stops further emissions. But it's difficult to make sure you're doing it right. And difficult also means expensive. So this technology is really expensive to implement to make sure you're getting it done right. And that's where like carbon taxes come in. So if a government started charging a company, an emissions company, like, you know, $100 for every ton of carbon dioxide they put out, quite quickly they'd be like, wait a sec, it's actually cheaper for us to carbon capture or cheaper for us to change our methods so that we're not producing this amount of carbon emissions. And the final one, so what we've really looked at is how to stop these emissions, but we can't really stop them yet. If we are going to have them, how to limit what they've got, and ways that we can actually get some of that carbon dioxide back out of the atmosphere. So the really big one is this one. It's very popular, is save the planet, plant a tree. Because as we looked at in one of the causes, that trees actually draw in carbon dioxide. And it goes in there. And the trees really like that. And thinks it's really yummy. So if we stop cutting them down or we plant some more, that will start actually drawing the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So very simple solution, very popular solution, and one that you can quite easily get involved in, because all it costs is plant a tree, or John Muir Award, there's quite a lot of people. It costs you £5 to plant a tree. So a very accessible way to do it. There are quite a lot of problems with this one though. So A is the amount of land that is currently being used for forests. Obviously, so this is one we've got here. For us to have any significant impact on the emissions that exist to stop, or even stop the emissions that we're currently producing, we would need to have this entire area of permanent forests. So this entire area would need to go from 30% forestry to 100%. And even that would only last us for around about 5 to 10 years before we would need to plant another area, all of forestry. And where would that would be? So then that would be like kind of the same area would be around about there. And then in the next 5 years we need to do it again. So if we don't actually tackle the problem, we're going to quickly run out of space we can plant forests on to solve the problem for us. So that's one issue with it. That's one problem with our evaluation, that we need a huge amount of land to solve it. The second problem is this. Because it's such a popular solution, there's a lot of companies capitalizing on it. So I just put this in a wee while ago. If I was to fly from London to New York, I would produce 3.6 tons of carbon dioxide for my trip. And people might feel really guilty about that. So to ease your guilt, I can add in £94 to an carbon offsetting program to make myself feel better. And some of these are reforestation projects. The problem with these though is that, well, sometimes these aren't exactly the most moral places. I'm sure this one is. But there's some people capitalizing this for the business that they can then realize they can make a lot of money. From basically producing, or allowing people to pay them to produce forests. People that will then plant the forests, so they'll plant the trees. So like, yes, we'll plant some trees. We'll grow them for 10 years. And then after 10 years, they will chop them down and sell them for wood. Clear that land where they then can get paid to grow more trees. So effectively this company has the best business strategy ever, that someone pays for their product, pays them to plant trees, and then they cut them down and pay people to take the trees away. so they're constantly making money. Now, I'm not saying every reforestry company is doing this, but there are definitely some in the world, especially in places like Brazil, that are doing this. And a tree needs to be planted for 20 years plus to actually make a difference in terms of its carbon emissions. So this is a really controversial one. There's quite a lot of stories about this where people are maybe not making or paying and thinking I'm doing a good thing for the environment, but they then don't worry about it afterwards. It also makes people guilt-free. So people feel like, oh, you know what, I paid my duty, I paid for these trees, so I can do what I want, and then not worry about reducing their emissions at all. So it's a really controversial one and a really difficult evaluation for afforestation. So that is the 3 strategies I kind of want to look at.